So I basically cannot stop thinking about the desert as soon as it cools down here in the Pacific Northwest. In this video, I'll be breaking down my itinerary and trip details from my most recent trip to the desert, which was my 6th trip to the Southwest, because right now is a great time to plan a trip to the desert. Let's get into it. So our trip was in early March, and we all flew into the Las Vegas airport. I feel like so many of my desert trips start at the Vegas airport because it's pretty inexpensive to fly into, and there's always tons of rental options as far as cars and hotels, all of it. And the Vegas airport is so close to so many of some of my favorite outdoor adventures. We rented a Toyota 4Runner, and I recommend having something with clearance and 4-wheel drive if you're going to be doing some of these exact spots. We happened to experience record levels of rain on our trip, which was wonderful. But muddy roads definitely helps to have the 4-wheel drive. So day one, our first stop was heading to our Airbnb in St. George, Utah. This would be our kind of our home base for the next couple nights. We pretty much immediately unpacked our stuff and got back in the car to head to Snow Canyon, which is where we went for sunset, and a place I've been twice now. Conveniently only a 15-minute drive from our Airbnb. I needed a redemption visit to Snow Canyon because the first time I went, which was just a few months before this, I had a mouse in my van there, and it completely ruined my plans to see some of the slot canyons and do some of the hikes there. And I'm happy to say the second trip was much better. But between those two trips, I checked out quite a few spots, and I definitely recommend the Petrified Dunes hike. It's just over 1 mile round trip, and you get to see layers of lava rock and sandstone, and it kind of reminded me of Zion National Park, but with like zero crowds and yeah, just incredible views. I definitely recommend having some sort of map system while you're here, because between the sandy trails and rock, there's not a lot of markers, and we definitely got kind of misled on the trail a few times. But where we went for sunset was an even easier spot to get to, required no hiking, and it's actually outside of the canyon looking down into the canyon. So it's called Snow Canyon Scenic Overlook, and it's just on Google Maps. Drive right up, and it's just incredible. Some of my favorite photos from the trip were taken here, and it was a good way to kind of start off our trip together. So day two, we headed into Zion National Park. I haven't been there since 2016, but it was still nice to go back, and it was Logan's first time going, so we got to see it through fresh eyes, which is always so much fun. Even traveling off season, it can get pretty busy in Zion, and some of the parking lots are ridiculously small. So we had to kind of drive the Mount Carmel Zion Highway several times to get a spot at the place we wanted to hike, which is Canyon Overlook Trail. This trail absolutely blew me away. I cannot believe that I'd never done it before in my trip before to Zion, but it is just under a mile and has some of the best views in the park, in my opinion. And I've hiked Angel's Landing, and to do this without having to worry about permits and without that crazy hike was definitely worth it. I've heard it's a really good sunrise spot, but we went midday and still really enjoyed our photos, and we even got to see a little bit of the snow-capped mountains there too. You could easily make a whole day out of going to Zion National Park, but we were heading out for some pretty exciting sunset plans, so that was the only hike we did, and we hit the road. So this next destination was where we were really glad we had the 4-wheel drive, and while we had no problems, the high clearance definitely came in handy, and there were several moments on that drive about an hour from Zion that everyone was a little tense and it got really quiet. But it's really not that bad. It just depends on the weather, and I think all the rain leading up to that made it a lot worse. So Yant Flat, or the Candy Cliffs, which is super well named if you've seen photos of it. It's like this red and orange and white swirls of sandstone and just different layers and textures that I've never seen before in nature like this. The hike is around 3 miles round trip. It's really not too strenuous as far as elevation goes, but the sand does make it challenging in sections. And I do recommend navigation for this one as well. We used All Trails. It gets pretty confusing in certain areas where you really can't tell if you're on the trail. So I highly recommend having a route. I definitely recommend sticking around for sunset, but do make sure you bring your headlamp for the way back out. Doing both of these in one day was pretty tiring. It was just a lot of driving, not so much that the hikes were strenuous, but we were definitely ready to go to bed and eat our Thai takeout. Day 3, it was time for us to relocate as a new home base, and we drove to Kanab, Utah, which was just a couple hours away. We had this really cute Airbnb booked and we were really excited to get there. It was called Red Cliffs Retreat, and I'll put the link down in the description because it was so cute. Just like classic Southwest. The owner, Brian, was super nice and also an adventurer himself and photographer. But between the driving for that day and the rain continuing, we decided to take a chill day. And the older I get and the more I travel, the more I value having a down day. It really just makes the trip so much more enjoyable. The next day, unsurprisingly, the rain continued, but even harder. So we had to shift our plans because the place we were going to try to go was a series of dirt roads that were hard to navigate to begin with on a good weather day. So we shifted our plans and decided to do some more touristy things. Maybe not even touristy, I guess just classic Southwest spots that are very accessible. So we drove into Page, Arizona, which is where so many incredible places are, but we visited Horseshoe Bend, which in the rain was kind of nice. I feel like for a spot that you see so much online, it was nice to have it look a little bit different with the rain. I ended up taking probably my favorite film photo from that trip too. Also, the last time I was there was 2016 again, and it is so different now. They have parking, like structured parking and fences up now, but you can still, you know, find your angles and your spots. And in that same area was Wahweap Viewpoint, Lone Rock, and the classic Utah border sign. The famous Slot Canyon, Antelope Canyon is there as well, but we did not make reservations and did not want to venture out there in the rain. And after a day of getting in and out of the car and just being drenched, it was so nice to have that cozy Airbnb to go back to, which also had its own incredible views and hiking trails nearby. So we were just gonna kind of see if maybe the weather would shift for us. So day 5, we ended up making our way back towards Vegas where we'd be flying out the next day. And of course, this is when the weather decided to be beautiful and sunny. But we drove to Valley of Fire State Park, which is just about an hour outside of Vegas, and it's probably one of my favorite Southwest spots to visit. We drove around stopping at the pull-offs and then eventually made our way to the White Domes Trail. It was kind of just a day of wandering around and soaking up the sun, which was so nice after an entire week of rain. I think my favorite views there are the classic Mouse Tank Road view and the Fire Wave Trail. This is just an area where you get there and it's prettier than the photos, which sometimes you just never know. Both times I went to Valley of Fire State Park, I wish I would have spent more time there. The camping there is really scenic. It backs up against these just incredible canyons and it's first come, first serve. So I need to plan a whole trip back just for Valley of Fire. So yeah, that was our Southwest road trip, condensed. I'm so thankful for these memories that I had with these women and traveling and getting to soak up a little bit of sun, but regardless of the weather, it was still worth it and I would 100% do it again. And I'll be linking my blog posts that have a lot more detail. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Thanks for being here.